Hello, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. We'll be starting in just a moment. Welcome, everyone. Hello. Okay, well, wonderful. Hello, everyone. Aloha and welcome. Thank you all for taking time out of your day and your lunch hour to be here with us. I'm Ivy Castellanos with the Alzheimer's Association Hawaii chapter. I guess as we all kind of log in and get settled, I'll just go over a couple of quick housekeeping items. First, please note that today's webinar is being recorded, and we will share a link to the recording and the slides after today's session. We will also have time at the end of the presentation today for some Q&A and discussion. So we encourage you, please feel free to type your questions into either the Q&A section or into the chat. And we will pick these up at the end of the presentation. So as I think many of you might be aware, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and we really wanted to hold space for something that I think is universally experienced by all of us, but isn't always necessarily spotlighted and perhaps can be a tough topic to broach, but that's grief. And we really wanted to talk about the grief that's specific to caregivers, and in particular, caregivers of people with dementia. And so I think, as many of you know, this grief is unique in that it's often experienced as sort of a long series of psychological losses over time. And it's so multifaceted. So thank goodness we have two of Hawaii's thought leaders on these very conversations around grief and caregiving. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce our guest presenters, Sara-May and Dr. Kevin Kawamoto. Sara-May serves as the Director of Mission and Spiritual Care at Adventist Health Castle. She's a board-certified chaplain with a diverse educational background. She holds a Master of Business and a Master of Divinity and spent her undergraduate studying art and social work. Sara-May leans into conversations, curiosities, and realities of grief, trauma, death, and dying, in hopes to find ways to support the people she encounters both personally and professionally. Our second speaker is a gerontological social work educator at the Center on Aging at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. This, of course, is Dr. Kevin Kawamoto. Dr. Kawamoto has taught gerontology courses at the university level and has co-authored academic textbooks on aging, journalism, and communication. He currently works on various projects at the UH Manoa Center on Aging and was part of a CDC-funded team that helped research and write Hawaii 2035, State Strategic Plan on Alzheimer's Disease and Related Dementias. He continues to support this project through participation in the Hawaii Dementia Initiative based in the state's Executive Office on Aging. Sara-May and Kevin, we are so grateful to have you here with us. Kevin, I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kevin Kawamoto. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And it's really my honor to be giving this presentation for the Alzheimer's Association and with Sara-May, who I have known for a while and just admire the work that she does in the community. So I'm looking forward to learning from Sara-May as well. As many of you know, someone with dementia can live many years. And oftentimes when I am working with someone who, a family who has a member with dementia, I'll ask, when did you first start noticing that your loved one had dementia? And I'm surprised, here in Hawaii, sometimes people can say that their loved one has had dementia for over a decade. You know, the average they usually say is about 8 to 10 years. That's kind of what the research says for Alzheimer's disease. But here in Hawaii, we have a very long life expectancy, and there are many people here who have family members who they say have had, for example, Alzheimer's disease for much longer than 10 years. And the topic that we're going to be talking about today is dementia and grief and the long goodbye. And the term the long goodbye really refers to this idea that with some types of progressive diseases, and Alzheimer's disease being one of them, even though it is classified as being a terminal illness, a person will die of that disease if they don't from something else before that. They can live with the disease for a fairly long time. And sometimes you meet a person or a family whose loved one has had dementia for quite a while. So they're more in the advanced stages of the disease. And they oftentimes will say something like this. They'll say, I wish you could have known mom before she had dementia. And when somebody says something like that, what I think they're really saying is that they're grieving for the person that they feel is no longer there. They miss the person that they remember before she or he, in another instance, had dementia. And it's something to listen for. They may not be able to articulate or have the language to talk about the grief and the sadness and the loss they feel for the loss of the person they remember, but also the grief that's associated with the changes that they're observing in that person. Of course, memory is one of them, but other changes that they're seeing and they're experiencing firsthand has to do with changes in perhaps that person's personality, their behaviors, their ability to do the kinds of things that they used to do prior to being in the more advanced stages of a disease that causes dementia symptoms, and so forth. So this idea of, I wish you could have known this person before he or she had dementia is really, I think speaking to that idea of grieving the losses that they've been witnessing and experiencing. So one of the takeaways from today's talk is really that when we talk about grief and loss, we're not only talking about death. It oftentimes seems like when we talk about grieving that we are referring to the grieving after someone has passed away. But in the case of a progressive disease like Alzheimer's, where, like I said, someone might be living with the disease for a decade or more, but even just for a few years, the grief may be related to the experience of these progressive losses that you are witnessing as time goes on, that feeling of sadness that this person isn't the person that I remember before these symptoms started taking a hold of that person. So I think when somebody says something like, "I wish you could have known my mom or my dad or my grandfather before they had dementia," one thing that you could say in response to that, rather than trying to minimize that feeling or that experience, is to just say, "Tell me about her. What was she like? What kinds of things did she like to do? What kinds of things did you do together?" Include the person with dementia in the conversation, and the caregiver can fill in the blanks. And this experience of reminiscing together is really trying to paint a picture of the whole person, not just the person that you see in front of you today, the person at some stage of dementia, but the person who used to be, in the past, the person who she is now, and maybe the person who some of the dreams and expectations that still exist for that person moving into the future. But that person may not be able to paint a full picture of himself or herself alone, but needs the help of others who know him or her to help fill in the blanks, as I say. One of the things that can help with this is to use photographs, have pictures available. I love photos. One thing about photos that I've learned is photos from the past, it's very helpful to have little notations on the back so that you know what it is. And, I had some examples of photos that I was going to show you, but um, they're from so long ago that if I look at the photo, I have no idea what this photo is about. When I flip it over, I remember when I was younger, my dad used to always say, write a note on the back of the photo so that you know what this is, because long into the future, you're going to look at that photo and you're not going to remember what that photo is about. And it's come to fruition because I have a lot of photos now that I look at and I have no idea what the photo is really about. I don't remember the details. Sometimes I don't even remember the event itself, but I flip it over and I see there's the notation back there. Um, that would be photographs, objects, music, types of food that the person like, all kinds of things that you can talk about to get to know the person with dementia will help you rebuild this person in a way that the person is not able to express right now because of memory loss and some other problems. And so I think reminiscence is one way, combined with creativity and building rapport and conversation and so forth, to really help work through the grief of loss. And I'm reminded of this Willie Nelson song. The lyrics say, it's not something that you get over, it's something you get through. I like those lyrics because with certain kinds of uh, diseases and certain kinds of experiences, it's not necessarily something that you get over, that it's going to get better, but you kind of work through, you find ways to accommodate and you try ways um, to find ways of improving uh, the situation. So as we move into a conversation of grief and the caregiver journey, Sarah will talk about what grief is and also maybe what are some ways that we can connect to people who are grieving that will be helpful and maybe avoid some ways of shutting them down or not allowing them to express themselves and share more. So Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you and you can take over the next part of the presentation.
Awesome. And a little plug for Kevin. He is so insightful on this, conversation. And if you ever need a sounding board, he's probably the perfect person, especially within this topic. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the basics of grief. I think a lot of us feel overwhelmed by what happens in our lives, and we don't always understand the narrative that's playing out. And often it points to grief, which is interesting because a lot of people think grief is only in one form. So this is a reminder that grief is a strong, sometimes overwhelming emotion for people, regardless of whether their sadness stems from the loss of a loved one or from a terminal diagnosis they or someone they know have received. So grief is naturally a natural reaction to loss of what is important to an individual. It's not necessarily always a person. It could be a place that you grew up that the family sold. So the cabin that had all your favorite memories in it is no longer in your family. It could be a fire took all your possessions, so you don't have the physical pictures anymore and you're trying to remember them all. Loss can happen on so many different levels, and that can stimulate grief in the conversation as well. So then the question becomes, practically, how do we cope with grief? I threw some things up here. Often I like to unpack what these actually look like, but I'll try to keep it brief for the sake of attention span and also some things I want to get to. I think one of the biggest things for all of us as we're navigating post-COVID and as we're navigating being a caregiver or grief is self-care, acknowledging your own grief, what you're going through, taking care of yourself, celebrating the small steps. It's important to find ways to laugh. Laughter, there's all these studies on what that does to your brain, your body, your psyche, all of it. Go to therapy, join a support group. Sometimes you just need a sounding board, someone to lean into, and then educate yourself on the difference between grief and what is depression. Because often people that are grieving feel like they've fallen into a deep depression. And yes, depression and grief go hand in hand often, but it's important to realize the different notes of it. And that's a whole conversation of itself that unfortunately we don't have time to unpack. But the other thing is talking about the timeline. So when you have a loss of someone or someone gets diagnosed with something that's incredibly challenging, we have to allow time to be healing. We give ourselves that space. We give our community that space. A lot of religious communities do really well at that. And some of us are not so good at giving ourselves time. So giving yourself space to simply be and take all the breaths that you need are valuable. Try not to focus on expected timelines. Just because someone else moved through something quicker or longer than you doesn't mean that you're broken or that you did it wrong. Finding community. Community is one of the most healing things when done well. Conversations with family and friends, joining in on things where you feel comfortable, like maybe it's allowing nature and people to be healing, so going on walks with a walking club, or maybe you take a bird watching, or maybe you just meet people and start having a conversation about similarities. Finding things to be part of is huge because that reminds us of hope. And then, of course, many people lean into their faith tradition or belief, the thing that grounds them, whether it's nature or whether it's going to church or whether it's some other form. And then empathy. And empathy is one I am going to pause a little bit extra on. Allowing empathy for yourself and for others. Your grief journey is unique, and allow people to help even with some easy tasks. Because empathy is one of those things that I think we understand, but we don't always know if it is truly empathetic. Because I think we mix up a couple things with empathy. So I'm actually going to go into a conversation about empathy versus sympathy, because these are the two that I think we mix up the absolute most. When I was a kid, I was taught if someone's going through something tough or if someone passes away, the first thing you do is you send a sympathy card, right? So sorry for your loss, thinking about you, sending hope to you on this dark day or whatever it may be. And that's a sympathy card, and that's beautiful, and it meets a need. But there's a difference between mailing you a card and saying, hey, you over there, so sorry that you're going through this, and me stepping into the space with you and saying, like, I'm here, what can I do to support you? And those are just two very different dynamics. There's this video that was done. Brene Brown is a great author. She's a great presenter. And she did a talk, and I think it's a TED Talk. And she talked about the difference between empathy and sympathy. And I think it clarifies a bunch of things for me and helps me refocus on what is important and how I care for people, how I care for myself, and how I navigate going forward. So I'm going to go ahead and play this short video for you.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right. So there's so many things that happen in this video that I think is so inspiring and incredible, because I think it's so easy for us to kind of get caught in the trying to find the right words to say, trying to solve the problem, trying to find that silver lining because we think, oh, we shouldn't be this hard on things, or maybe we're trying to find the silver lining with someone else. And the reality is it's not always helpful to try to fix it. It's not always helpful to try to find the silver lining. And if you're caring for your loved one and they're not exactly who they were years before, and they don't remember you, and you're navigating that and you're grieving that, if someone comes up to you and says, at least they're still alive, the answer is absolutely. I'm so glad they're still alive. I'm so honored to be able to care for them. But at the same time, it doesn't always feel good because it shuts down all the other things that you're having to navigate alongside that. And it gets really overwhelming and very big feeling. And so recognizing kind of the difference, people are trying so hard. Sympathy is trying so hard to connect with you and understand what's going on, but they don't know how. They don't know how to step into that space. Maybe it's because they're burnt out. Maybe it's because they don't realize the depth of what you're going through. But empathy is stepping into that space and holding it with you and not trying to shut it down and not try to push it out. And I think when the conversation of grief comes in, that's where it gets a little dicey, because grief is scary to a lot of people. A lot of people don't want to talk about sadness. They don't want to talk about the things that really hurt. They don't want to talk about reality. And COVID really opened up that conversation to a lot of people. So way more people can talk about it now. But there's still a huge level of fear and not knowing what to do when someone is honest and vulnerable about what they're navigating and facing. So as we continue to go through, I just threw this up here. The modified Kubler-Ross model, this is one that I have a love-hate relationship with, because I think it's one of those things that it dictates what you're supposed to think or do. But the value I see in it, especially the modified one, is they added a couple. So the original ones were denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And often people thought that was the order grief would happen in. And then later they added shock and they added testing. Once they added those two, I actually had a better relationship with it, because I was like, yeah, those are different. Denial and shock are different, and testing and acceptance and bargaining are all very different. And so this just shows that there's a whole wild root of what we react to in grief. And they're in order, they're out of order. Sometimes we face one way longer. Sometimes we don't face them the way that we think we do. And then 3 years later, all of a sudden you're bargaining and you're trying to figure out, like, what is happening? How am I facing this? Like, this makes no sense. I can't believe it's been 2 years. I can't believe I didn't know more. I can't believe. And then you start bargaining for a situation that's long gone. So this is just to show that there are scientific and things that have been studied that show up in a lot of people when they navigate grief. But that doesn't mean that this is the only list. That doesn't mean this is the order of the list. And this doesn't mean that once you get to acceptance, that you never round back to anger, depression, denial, shock. Because as humans, we live deeply and we feel deeply, and our brains are so powerful that they just kind of keep spinning and they go back and forth. And acceptance is great, but that doesn't mean you've stopped grieving once you've accepted the reality of what you're facing. And I think that's really important to remember. One of my grief group members actually emailed me this week, and so I threw it in the slide. She was like, this is what you always talk about in grief group. Because people that haven't grieved or don't understand what grief looks like in their life, because I think everyone's grieved, we just label it different things. They think grief is a straight line. You go through these steps, you get to point A to point B, and then you're okay, and you should feel better. And then in the new year, you should be fine because it's the new year. You've navigated all the first holidays, right? But the truth is, reality is, you go in all sorts of directions. You tangle yourself up in yourself. Sometimes you have to restart and go backwards. It's just kind of a journey that is unique, beautiful, chaotic, and perfect for you, right? And it's not always fun, but there's power in allowing yourself to go on that journey so that way you can land in a healthy place. I really like this quote. Sometimes it's okay if the only thing you did today was breathe, because sometimes I beat myself up. My mom suddenly passed away a year and a half ago, and I specialize in grief, right? And I should know all the processes. And every so often it trips me up, and I'm just like, what am I supposed to do? Like our soursop tree is having way too many soursops and they fall and then the birds eat them and then I can't harvest them in time. And all I can think is, oh, my mom was psychotic about the soursop tree. She would always come out and she would come and harvest all of them and have a huge pile. She'd freeze the ones she couldn't use. And then I get caught in a spiral of what ifs, or why did it happen that way? Or what can I do better? Or I should have. And it goes into this weird place in my brain where I end up regressing in some senses. But in other senses, I love that I still have these memories that stop me in my track, that remind me of like the beauty of who was and what is happening. So sometimes it's okay if the only thing you did today was breathe. Give yourself the grace that you deserve. Give yourself the empathy that you would want to be able to give the best friend that you have. I have another video that kind of illustrates, I'm a big fan of videos because they articulate things very clearly and well. There's this video that kind of reminds me, when it comes to grief, often, again, as humans, we don't always know how to make it better. So we try to throw joy at it, or we try to problem solve it. So there's this video that reminds us about how we can care for ourselves and how it's okay to have boundaries, but also how to care for other people and love other people.
So what do we do about all the pain we see in the world? All the pain we feel in our own lives? And why does it seem like our best efforts to help somebody feel better always backfire? I've been studying intense grief and loss, baby death, violent crimes, accidents, suicides, and natural disasters. And I've learned something really interesting. Cheering people up, telling them to be strong and persevere, helping them move on, it doesn't actually work. It's kind of a puzzle. It seems counterintuitive, but the way to help someone feel better is to let them be in pain. This is true for those giant losses and the ordinary, everyday ones. Educator Parker Palmer writes, "The human soul doesn't want to be advised or fixed or saved. It simply wants to be witnessed, exactly as it is." He's talking about acknowledgement here. Acknowledgement is this really amazing multi-tool. It makes things better even when they can't be made right. For example, somebody's struggling. Their baby died, or there's been a bad accident, or their mom got sick, and they're just sad. It's way more helpful to join them in their pain than it is to cheer them up. But here's what we tend to do instead. You have 2 other children, you need to find joy in them. Or, you know what you need? You just need to go out dancing and shake it off. Or, I felt really sad once. Did you try acupuncture? We're not really sure what to do with someone's pain, so we do what we've been taught. We look on the bright side. We try to make people feel better. We give them advice. It's not like this is nefarious. I mean, we try to cheer people up because we think that's our job. We're not supposed to let people stay sad. The problem is, you can't heal somebody's pain by trying to take it away from them. Now, acknowledgement does something different. When a giant hole opens up in someone's life, it's actually much more supportive to acknowledge that hole and let pain exist. It's actually a radical act to let things hurt. It goes against what we've been taught. In order to really support you, I have to acknowledge that things really are as bad as they feel to you. If I try to cheer you up, you end up defending yourself and your feelings. If I give you advice, you feel misunderstood instead of supported. And I don't get what I want either, because I wanted you to feel better. It's pretty rare that you could actually talk somebody out of their pain. Rarely does the admonishment to look on the bright side actually heal things for someone. It just makes them stop telling you about their pain. It's so tempting to try to make things better. When somebody shares something painful, it's much more helpful to say, "I'm sorry that's happening. Do you want to tell me about it?" To be able to say, "This hurts," without being talked out of it, that's what helps. Being heard helps. It seems too simple to be of use, but acknowledgement can be the best medicine we have. It makes things better, even when they can't be made right.
So as you can see, it's very easy, whether it's us grieving or other people grieving, to try to find the thing that's like rainbows and sunshines and fix it and make it feel better. And let's just make this go away. We don't want to talk about the dark stuff. But what we end up doing to ourselves and other people is often shutting down. We cyclone ourselves. We put it in a little space where like it's only me. Like I can't share with other people because I don't want to be that person that's sad or still navigating this, or even though this is my 18th Christmas with the same situation, it still hurts. And people are like, oh, here we go again, or whatever we tell ourselves. It's easy for us to start shutting people out and pulling ourselves away. And this goes back to that kind of grief versus burnout. I think sometimes we need space from people, but sometimes we need to go ahead and encounter people, because the best way we can grow and heal and navigate life is as a community, especially in Hawaii. That's one of the things I love so much about being here is everyone is family. Everyone wants to be part of that community. Everyone wants to cheer for each other. And like I said, it gets complicated, it gets messy. And if we're not careful of how we approach other people or even how we navigate it ourselves, sometimes we start alienating ourselves and other people from true conversation and true healing opportunity. So one of the areas I tend to focus on the most is actually the practical side of it. If I could have a conversation with you, I'd ask you what is self-care and what is coping skills? Often we think they're similar, but the truth is that I'm really good at coping skills and I'm really bad at self-care. Why? Because coping is reactive. I'm very good at reacting to things because I am a chaplain in a hospital. I respond to codes. I never know what's going on half of my day and I just show up for it, right? And I react to it. But many people pride themselves in how they are able to do self-care, because self-care is preventative. It's the things you do on a daily basis to set yourself up for success. It's the things that you do that just make you feel good. Why? For no other reason than good mental health or good physical fitness or whatever it may be that grounds you, brings you hope, gets you to the place where you can navigate all the things ahead. Everyone needs coping skills, sure, but hopefully we don't need to use those. The truth is self-care is where it's at, right? If we could all do great self-care, I think we'd be in a really good place as a community. So the questions I often ask myself and other people are you more focused on self-care or coping? Are you thinking preventatively or are you reacting to everything? How do you care about yourself? How do you prioritize who you are in the journey of whether it's your grief or someone else's grief, or if you're a caregiver? It's really easy to focus all of your attention on them and focus. And then by the time you get back to caring for yourself, you're like, well, I guess I have time for a shower. And honestly, celebrate that shower. Celebrate that you did something for yourself. And even on the days when you don't get that shower, celebrate that you went and you drank a good cup of coffee while staring at a bird outside the window, just because that is something good you did that day. But the truth is we need to start living as a community and less coping and reactive and start living more in preventative. COVID made most of us live in reactive mode. We didn't know what was coming next. We didn't know what the next rule was going to be. We didn't know who it was going to affect. We didn't know if it was affecting people. We had all these unknowns. So we lived in a very reactive mindset. So learning about where we focus our attention now. Are we preventing stress? Are we taking care of ourselves for the sake of caring for ourselves? Or are we only caring for ourselves when it's super bad? Or if there's just like, oh, well, I need to take this person for a walk because that's who I'm taking care of. And so I'm just going to double that as my self-care. That's still coping. That's still not you prioritizing just yourself. So there's that balance that needs to come into place. And then I like to reflect and talk to people about what are things that ground you? What are the things that bring you hope, fill your cup? Some people need to stand in dirt or on grass so that they feel grounded and like nature still exists. Some people need to paint a picture. Some people need to listen to music. Some people need to play music. I have a friend that their biggest thing that grounds them isn't going to church or even going outside or surfing or anything. It's listening to a record from start to finish in the right order that the musicians wanted it to be listened to. Because for some reason that makes them think, oh, wow, how cool is it that this musician had this whole thing planned out and this is how the songs line up and this is where it leads. And for them, it takes them completely out of where they are in life and helps them look to something beyond themselves. And so what are the things that ground you? For many people, it's going to the ocean. For many people, it's reading a good book, sometimes meeting a friend for coffee, and others, it's often going to a community gathering. And then follow up is, what is something that you lean into? That could be, that's another topic that's really broad. That could be just, you know, you decided to take up knitting, and so you're leaning into the knitting club, you know, or something like that. But it's also could just be into like, I want to learn more about Alzheimer's or dementia. Like, what does that look like for other people? What am I navigating here? Or maybe it's, I like nerding out about like what different cultures do in grief, you know, or whatever you're interested in. So what are you leaning into? And then here's one that's practical and abstract. What brings hope when feeling hopeless? I would love to say that most of us say that's the same thing that grounds us, but honestly, when we find hope, I think that's something that's uplifting and more energizing, right? So there's immediate light. And a lot of times I hear, and especially my grief groups, like they'll watch things like I Love Lucy, you know, and they'll just laugh mindlessly, and it makes them feel hope because there's still an opportunity to laugh. So it could be as abstract as that, or it could be like, hey, I lean into scripture or I lean into poetry, and it helps take me out of where I'm at. And then kind of reframing. So what you have all these things that you don't feel good about, and you're overwhelmed, and life seems unfair, and you don't feel like you can meet any of the needs or any things that are going on in your life. The question then becomes, well, what are you feeling good about? Yes, there's all these things to feel bad about. There's all these things that are frustrating and overwhelming, but what are you feeling good about? And it could be as basic as, I just ground fresh coffee and it smells good. I haven't even had a cup, but it smells good, right? And that's something you feel good about. And then the last one here is, where is an area of growth for you? I think as humans, we all have areas of growth. None of us have arrived. I'd love to say we've arrived, but I think there's actually really beauty in having curiosity and wanting to still grow in an area. And maybe it's self-care. Maybe it's in learning more about a disease that you're navigating or facing. Maybe it's you have a grandchild now and you don't understand how kids these days are parenting. Whatever it may be, looking for that area of growth is really valuable because it grows you and doesn't have you like stall out in a place of grief or darkness. That helps you want to do something beyond yourself again and to grow and become a better version of yourself. So these are some questions that I'll often ask myself. I'll ask people I work with just to kind of start the conversation of, where do we want to navigate? Where do we want to go? And what is our priority? Are we wanting to get better coping skills because we can't seem to live in self-care? Or do we want to flip the script and say, okay, I may have mediocre, decent coping skills, but how do I get more into the preventative, the self-care, where I can take ownership of what's going on and navigate it healthily? So that way, the next time something big happens or something confusing happens, I don't get completely caught off guard. I already have things in place that help me navigate it healthily. And I have no idea where this quote came from, so I will be clear about that. I have this up on my wall, and it just says, grief is the last act of love we have to give to those we loved. Where there is deep grief, there was great love. And I've always really appreciated this because grief is overwhelming. But when we get to sit back and think of all the beauty that comes from a narrative of loving someone and being connected to someone and seeing someone and being able to share stories with someone, like that's where it's at. That's really beautiful. I just think there's so much power in beauty and recognizing the love that does come out of grief. And with that, I will say thank you. Always feel free to email me if you have questions. I'm happy to also share this slide deck. I saw that message in the chat. And I think we're going to go into the time of, if you have any questions for Kevin or myself on either the topic of grief or where he specializes and how we can support or clarify anything.
Thank you so much, Sara-May. I did see early on, there was a question, and I'll read it. How do you know if it's depression or long goodbye grief? Is there a difference in treatment or resources? Great question.
That is a really great question. Kevin, you're welcome to jump in at any point. I'll start with, I wish that there was clean answers for questions like that. I think the parameters of grief are really messy, and so is depression, because it stems off of so many things. But my immediate response would be depression's probably more of a chemical makeup than it is of a situational makeup. So long goodbye grief can go into the chemical form, but I do think there's a slight difference. I would say if I was a psychiatrist or a psychologist, I would have a clearer answer for you. I do think there's different things of you having a pinpoint, like with a goodbye grief, you have something you can pin it on, like this is where it stems from, versus depression often is more like a generic everything. And again, that's a generalization of an answer, but I don't know if that helped clarify or if Kevin wants to add to that.
Yeah, I can add something to that. And like you, mine will, be in the realm of generalities as well. Initially, the manifestation is very similar. So you look at depression and grief, and the person may be experiencing deep sadness and similar kinds of symptoms between the two. But with grief over time, it's often expected that the severity of the symptoms will decrease, whereas with depression, it might just continue and need treatment. And so it really, if it's interfering with a person's day-to-day life, whatever the symptoms are, and whichever it's attributed to, it really should be evaluated by a mental health professional. And that person would be able to look at, because those are two distinct categories. They'll be able to say, it's probably this or it's probably that. And these are some treatment options that are available in either case. But as I said, the initial manifestation could be very similar. And it used to be before major depressive disorder wasn't diagnosed if there was a very serious loss or death a certain amount of time prior to those symptoms. But now you could, I think most mental health professionals would say that you could have both grief as well as depression at the same time. And with grief, in some cases, it may go on for a longer time than one would expect, and it enters into this area called prolonged grief disorder or complicated grief, and that's something where someone is the symptoms continue for a very long period of time, sometimes for years, and it needs to be addressed in order to find some kind of relief for that.
Well, and I would add into that, I think some people aren't all into therapy, but I'm a huge fan of therapy. And I think establishing a relationship before you really need a therapist is actually the healthiest way to do it. I think a lot of people go to therapy because of a situation or because they're navigating depression or grief or something specific. But I'm a big fan of like, hey, even if you don't necessarily feel like you need it right now, there's a lot of beauty in having a sounding board that isn't super opinionated in one direction or another of what you're doing in certain areas. Like friends often come in with opinions, families often come in with opinions on how you should handle it. But professionals look at it from a different lens, and they're trained to navigate it with you and empower you to find healthy solutions. And so, yeah, I appreciate Kevin mentioning, I think both of them do need some extra support and want to make sure that you are supported and healthy through the process.
Yeah, can I just add one thing that it kind of adds on to what Sarah was talking about in her presentation? And that is, there's the difference between self-care and coping. And with certain diseases that last for a very long time, or could potentially last for a very long time, like Alzheimer's disease, you're going to need both for sure. You're going to need both coping mechanisms as well as self-care. And the thing about Alzheimer's is, because although we don't know exactly how it's going to manifest in every single person, we do know that it's probably going to be progressive. If the person lives long enough, they'll get worse. So it provides us with some time to plan and prepare for what may come. And those are things that you can start doing before things reach a critical stage, because it's just part of the self-care really, is to say, as things progress, these are the ways that I'm going to try to build support into our lives. I want to make sure that, we have that rather than trying to react at the very last minute when you're in a crisis stage. So it does provide some time to plan for the future when you have a progressive disease like that, as opposed to something that's really acute, where the changes occur overnight. So something, accident or some major internal problem happens, and within a matter of hours or days, the change occurs. With Alzheimer's disease, it's going to be something that's much more progressive.
Yeah. And I think grief does get so complicated when it comes to these progressive illnesses and these long-term, because it not only is them navigating what their new health looks like each day and maybe the unknowns that are, or the things that they used to be able to do, like maybe speech or memory or walking or whatever it may be, but also everyone that rallies around them has to shift what their expectation is as well, and what life looks like for them. And especially if you're a caregiver, it is the grief becomes so much more complicated because you're grieving what was, what is still, and what will come. So there's like a whole timeline that is different, instead of like, I lost my loved one and that's the timeline, right? So there's just a lot more that can happen in between. And then that's where also, for me, it's a big conversation of burnout. How do you care for yourself and your emotions when you're facing it daily and it's, progressing and becoming more and more complicated?
Yeah. And what actually can compound the problem is sometimes family members and friends will start disengaging from the family. They are uncomfortable. They are afraid of the extra responsibilities that may be asked of them. And so they start not gathering around and helping at a time when that's needed, so that could make the sort of the trauma of caregiving, if that's what the person is experiencing, even worse, because they feel very alone, that they feel almost abandoned, that they don't have that support. And you see both happening. I mean, families are very dynamic. They're very different. Sometimes I remember I was interviewing some people who work in hospitals, and they say in times of a health crisis, you see the best and the worst in human nature. And sometimes there are family members who you never expect would step up to the plate, and they're all completely supportive and helpful, and other times just the opposite is the case. But again, when you have the time to plan, you can look at what may happen, what are the needs that may be coming up in the future, and start, making arrangements for that, and focusing both on the care, self-care, and the coping.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Sarah. There's looks like a couple more questions. Is it ever helpful to turn off grief in order to stop feeling so bad and get on with life activities like your job, chores, etc.?
You want to start it, Kevin? Or do you want me to?
I would just say very quickly, I used to also talk about trauma, and not trauma necessarily from death, but all trauma from all kinds of other events, including violence. And oftentimes during presentations, when this topic comes up, people who compartmentalize their feelings, their emotions, because it's overwhelming, and they move on and they become workaholics, or they, do other things that maybe help them cope and get on with life, so to speak. They oftentimes find out that it comes back later, and it could be years or decades later. I've talked to people who have re-experienced trauma in their 90s from an experience that happened when they were 6 years old. So it's not that it's going to go away, but it's, you may be able to put it away for a while, but it may still be there, and it may come up at a time when you least expect it in the future.
Yeah. I think, again, this goes back to, this topic is so broad and each person's journey is so different that it's hard to definitively answer what's appropriate for a person, because it's truly individually based. But I did have a friend who was really stuck. And I was thinking about, I used to work for a company that did speech and orofacial myology. So they did a lot of like play therapy with the kids. It was interesting when they would take the kids to a different environment, one that brings them joy, like a playground. They could actually work on way more than if they kept them in this classroom or in a room or even at home, because that was an area that triggered so many different things for them. So I would say sometimes it is appropriate to step outside of like, okay, I've been feeling really down and dark and fixated on this one thing. Sometimes it's almost nice to play dress up and go disrupt whatever you may have going on in your life, so that way you can enter into a different mindset, even for just a second. So that way you can flip your brain out of the repeat button, right? Because if you get stuck too much in a rhythm, it's really easy to just stay in that rhythm because that's the one you know. And sometimes it is helpful to disrupt that. The challenge is avoidance. We don't want avoidance when it comes to grief. We want people to navigate it healthily and have the conversations and to allow the feelings to be when appropriate. But sometimes we do need to turn it off for a second so that way we can still breathe and have elements of joy. Because I know, especially when it comes to grief, so many people are like, am I allowed to be happy yet? Like, what is the timeline after someone passes away or someone navigates something that I'm allowed to laugh again without it being disrespectful? And the truth is, would that loved one want you to stay in the like down and dark and in this cycle? Or would they want you to be able to laugh again? And it's okay to laugh and then go back to grieving. It's all of it's fine. I think the disruption can be healthy, but just make sure to do it in the healthiest way and not get stuck in a delusion.
Thank you. I think perhaps we'll end with one last question. Can you recommend how to start the conversation with a family member who's caregiving, but who we know is not necessarily doing self-care?
That is always fun. Again, individually based. I'm sure Kevin has something wise to say about this, but for me, I actually had a friend who was not living their best life as they were navigating caregiving. They were definitely pouring every ounce of their strength into loving their parent, and it was really hard. I also have another friend who her partner got early onset dementia and changed as an individual. And so they every day spent their whole day trying to navigate how to please them or make their world better, that they started forgetting who they were. And so I think there is value as a friend to enter into that space and say like, hey, because I'm your friend, I want to see you thrive. I want to see you grow. I want to see you healthy. How can I support you? Like, do you need someone to come over and sit with that person so that way you can go on a walk, go to the store by yourself without having to clutch your phone, worrying or, coordinating someone to be with the person, whatever it may be, like disrupting their rhythm a little bit so they have permission to go take care of themselves. One of the biggest things someone said to me in college was, I give you permission not to feel like you have to do everything. And I remember thinking like, that's a really weird thing to say, but getting permission to not go to an event, to not have to be something for someone else, to not have to meet all the metrics and requirements, that makes people feel like, oh, I'm allowed to do this thing for me. It's not selfish. Being a caregiver and caring for yourself is not a selfish act, because you can't keep giving from an empty vessel.
And I'll add something really quickly to that. There are many reasons why someone may choose not to accept help. And it could have to do with financial reasons. They don't want to impose on people. They feel guilty that they're not able to do it themselves. They don't want a stranger coming into the home. They're embarrassed. I mean, there's lots of reasons they can find for not accepting help. Sometimes it reaches a certain point in which they realize, I got to do something at this point. I'm at a critical juncture, and that's where they're willing to make some accommodations. But I sort of will go with what Sarah was saying, which is that if you allow the person to share with you what is happening, and then maybe allow them to come up with the solution themselves, like, I feel overwhelmed, this is what's going, and so forth. it would really help if that person came up with the the solution, and then maybe you could help with saying how that solution can be realized. That would be a way of having the solution coming from the individual, as opposed to coming in and saying, well, this is what you need to do. Why didn't you do this? Or, so forth. That's really tapping into the strengths of the caregiver himself or herself, and allowing them some autonomy to say what they want and what they don't want.
Yep, and that goes back to that empathy side. Empathy is not trying to convince someone of something else, it's entering that space with them. And I think the best thing that we can do is navigate how to do self-care and to be a good example. So when we talk to people, it's like, I've found that it's really helpful for me and you're not trying to convince them of doing something that's hypothetical or not something that you live as well, because that's the hardest when someone gives you feedback and you're like, but you don't even do that, right? So it's hard to relate because you're like, you're the worst example. You don't do self-care. So leading by example, but also remembering that sometimes the biggest thing we can do to open up a safe space and a conversation is be present and accountable and, let them lead and guide the conversation.
Oh, excellent. Well, thank you. We are at the 1 o'clock hour, so unfortunately we've run out of time, but thank you everyone so much for joining us today. A huge mahalo to Sara-May and Dr. Kawamoto for kind of opening up this conversation and framing it in a way that was very kind of accessible and thoughtful. And we appreciate your knowledge and the tools and insights that you shared with us today. So thank you both very much. As we close, I'd just like to share on behalf of the Alzheimer's Association, I will put it in the chat that we do have, a 24-hour helpline. We have staff that's available, around the clock to answer questions, provide support, share resources. So please feel free to reach us via this 24-hour helpline. We'd also like to invite anybody who might be caregiving to one of our monthly caregiver support groups. We have in-person and virtual groups that meet on Oahu, Hawaii Island, Kauai, and Maui. We hope you'll join us next week. We have another great presentation on Tuesday, May 28th. This one will be on hoarding and dementia. So we will share, all of this information, resources, along with Sara-May's slide deck as well, in a follow-up email. So again, we thank you everyone and have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.